It's been a very long road to get here, and still eternity lay ahead. And we've been walking for so many cycles, blessing every step that we tread, dreaming this realm into life, dancing with the elements, developing inner coherence to crystallize our intent. We tune our fields to the song of the true self, infinite intelligence, to inhabit the array of divine creation in harmonious resonance. Love and wisdom live in our bones, and we awaken them with coherent tones. We hear our songs clearly, and we sing them true. The songs that vitalize and inspire me and you. Love and wisdom live in our bones, and we awaken them with coherent tones. We hear our songs clearly, and we sing them true. The songs that vitalize and inspire me and Causmic Garden, written by James Freeman, read by the author. Abracadabra. Aloha, and welcome to the garden. My name is Bagheera, and I'm the narrator. These stories are all fictional, so there's no need to go around insisting that the people, places, and events described here are real, like Anastasia, even if you feel particularly moved by them. Regardless of their purely coincidental similarity to any real person or situation, these stories have an explicit purpose, which does not hinge upon whether or not they can be verified by historical record. The purpose of these stories is to illustrate ways of living and being that differ greatly from those to which humanity in the so-called developed and allegedly civilized world has grown accustomed. The heroes in these tales are simply men and women who have discovered and moved into alignment with the laws of nature. Through communion with this cosmic law and devoted service to all life, they have brought peace to their lives and to their world. My intent in sharing these stories is that they may inspire you as they have inspired me, to learn and grow stronger, all ways and eternally. Thank you for being. Thank you for your presence. Blessings. Introduction. In the 21st century, according to what is called the Gregorian calendar, humanity collectively decided to bring an end to their denial of who we are in truth. When this decision was reached, most of humanity was so far in denial of the divine, of the true self, of the laws of nature, that they were aware at first of only very subtle changes happening deep within their psyches, hardly noticeable to them. Many mystics, sages, artists, and good old-fashioned red-blooded men and women who had tasted communion with nature through meditation, creative expression, and most often by placing their feet or hands firmly into the ground every once in a while, decided to remember who we are in truth long before the massive storm of the 21st century. They were the pioneers as humanity was brought face to face with all that we had created in fear, in separation, in limitation, in denial of the true self. When the decision was reached, empires which had been erected, rooted, and founded upon the denial of the divine began to fracture and dissolve, to the dismay of their creators and rulers, and even to the dismay of the serfs who had become enjoined to those empires through their own individual choices to deny the true self. At that time, the mystery schools, indigenous tribes, guilds, clans, councils, and other private associations were well hidden behind glamours and obfuscation. But when the levee broke, those who know who we are in truth came out of the woodwork. Meditation, spiritualism, shamanism, plant medicine, energy medicine, sound healing, fasting, natural diet, movement practices, lucid dreaming, remote viewing, divination, telepathy, telekinesis, all kinds of clairvoyance, permaculture, bioarchitecture, true anarchism, natural law, alternative history, terrain biology, alchemy, and every magical practice under the sun emerged from the sacred chambers of many a temple, ashram, library, guild hall, garage, and any other place of cosmic learning everywhere in the realm. The claim was and is made. We know who we are in truth. We are here, and we are free. Our story begins in the second quarter of the storm, in a small town near the Pacific Ocean, inside the northwest corner of what was then called Washington State. A young man named Gerald, who had been outside the womb for 16 solar cycles, had begun to feel very uncomfortable indeed. Gerald's life at the time this story begins was hardly extraordinary when compared to the lives of his peers. The other young men of 16 who he worked alongside in his public school days, and the friends he chose in his time at home. Though there was nothing he could claim to be strange, in a way that his fellows would qualify as such, going on in his life, he couldn't shake the feeling in his heart and guts that something was horribly wrong. Until then, Gerald believed everything he learned in school. Even when he conversationally entertained other ideas, he was comfortably nestled in his trust of his parents, of scientific institutions, of governments, of social infrastructure, to the extent that he believed his own intuitive faculties were in error any time he felt off. When Gerald was born, he had felt shocked, traumatized, betrayed, and neglected by his parents and all the institutions of the day. But by age 4, he had surrendered to the program, did as he was told, and learned to conceal his natural responses to the harm that had been leveled at his psyche and his body. By age 5, however, because of the suppression of his body's natural responses to the chemical warfare and the medical violence tragically common at the time, disease began to appear in his body and psyche. There was nothing wrong with Gerald. He wasn't broken or fundamentally flawed. His body simply did what it had to do to preserve its holistic integrity. The brain, to protect itself from the hazards of the unnatural environment where Gerald's childhood took place, shut down sections of itself and formed chemical barriers around those areas so that they would not be damaged by the poisons in the city air, water, and food. The little boy grew ill, as was the case with many in those days. But while pharmaceuticals would alleviate the symptoms, the root cause was the denial of the divine. Gerald's very essence, which cried for nature, for clean air, clean water, clean living food, and most of all, for true community, that cry was slowly quieted by social indoctrination, with its many methods of applying duress. By his 10th year, Gerald was an obedient citizen. He did as he was told, he believed what was prescribed, and he hoped that someday, if he worked really hard, he would be able to retire comfortably. Then, and only then, he might have rest. But in the summer of his 16th year, all that changed. Chapter 1. A Slumber's End. The changes which took place in Gerald are those which much of humanity is now becoming quite familiar with. Put simply, the young man began to spend his free time in nature, and as a result was eventually confronted by the true self, who had been denied for many years. Here's how it went. Gerald looked around at the world, and though he believed the things he was taught in school, he couldn't help feeling a deep sense of confusion as to why everything seemed so wrong. Surely, with all the knowledge of the scientific institutions, the wisdom and care of the government, the purity of principles and intentions present therein, as well as the totally benevolent and kind leanings of every scientific, medical, government, or other corporation, that the world shouldn't be so sad. Gerald wasn't blind to the sorrow of his peers, of his parents, of his teachers, of all the politicians and pundits on the telly, or to the sad state of the planet's ecosystems and all the creatures who dwell here. He thought to himself, if all these institutions and corporations are so wise and so knowledgeable and powerful as they declare, why are there hundreds of homeless people living at the park down the road? Why is it that when I talk with these homeless folks, it's evident that they need help and that help simply isn't there for them? Because it doesn't exist. The infrastructure hasn't been built. Why don't I see anyone building it? And why, if these so-called medical institutions are so capable, why are so many people sick? Why is it that with the alleged vast capabilities of our technological prowess, that very few people can even afford to eat healthy food? Why is there no infrastructure to really help everyone meet their basic needs? And why aren't people following their dreams? Why are they seemingly bound to these jobs and life situations that completely fail to provide them with a lasting sense of joy and true satisfaction? Moreover, why is it that the media is full of fear, animosity, death, and violence, and little to no talk in the mainstream about peace and building real community infrastructure? Why are millions of people being ignored by the governments and other corporations who claim to be so powerful and wise and devoted to serving humanity? And so, being a young man of prudence and practicality, Gerald investigated these things. The internet was something that had developed into a realm-wide planetary communications network, so Gerald, and most all people in the world, had some level of access to this network, and through that could find information about virtually anything. Many hours after looking into his concerns, Gerald came to the conclusion that he could, through careful consideration, develop feasible plans to remedy every single systemic problem that humanity faced. He began to develop those plans. As he studied the how of his plans, however, he was dismayed to find miles of red tape between him and those plans. So he did some more reading and arrived at a much more bleak conclusion. The red tape was evil. A mountain of unnatural bureaucracy stood in opposition to nature's laws and was, as far as he could see, suffocating the life of Earth, including every living being present in the realm. Mere practices of sustainable living such as growing food and medicinal herbs was inhibited by unlawful restrictions, permits, licenses, and fees, preventing many people from utilizing these fundamental methods of self-reliant survival. Similarly, the essential act of private trade had been shoehorned into a commercial structure so that the people were unlawfully robbed through deliberately misleading legal language and intentional deception conducted by private interests masquerading as lawful organizations. Moreover, it began to make sense to Gerald why everyone was so miserable. They knew they were in a pickle, but they couldn't see any way out of it. And though he was sharp, he couldn't see it either when he first found out about it. The young man knew, though, that even if he couldn't see a way out of this now clearly parasitic situation, there is always a remedy in nature, and he fully intended to find it. As Gerald continued his research, something began to come into his view. This parasitic situation had just as much to do with cowardice on the part of the common folk as it did on the malicious crime syndicates who preyed on the people's ignorance of law. It was actually through humanity's complacency and tacit agreement to the heinous crimes being committed on a planet-wide scale that allowed the situation to progress as far as it had. But in the murky waters of such circumstances, there are indeed shining rays of light. Brave, living men and women, vital and capable through generations of challenge, stood tall and strong in the face of these seemingly insurmountable obstacles. It was these people who Gerald began to learn from. On their websites, in their videos and music, art, poetry, and educational materials, Gerald bared witness to the emergence of a people in full knowing of who they are in truth, what they are in truth, and how they serve in truth. Through the work of these way-showers, the young man's heart and psyche relaxed. The tension and fear was gradually ameliorated by the evidence, viscerally presented by the service provided in the coherent, living expression of humanity's knowing. He was comforted, vitalized, and strengthened by the fierce love so vividly demonstrated by his brothers and sisters through their various words and actions of growth, of learning, of healing, of creating, all in devoted service to one another and to our cosmic family, the earth, sun, moon, and stars. As he approached the 17th anniversary of his born day, Gerald began to go outside with a frequency he had not reached since the early years of childhood. There was a common thread of the people whose work he had begun to follow. They all spoke to the vital power of nature and the cosmic living intelligence which flowed through the land, especially where the ecosystem was left alone by industry and so-called development. Such people, Gerald found, universally agreed that a physical, electrical, chemical, and psychological relationship with the land itself was requisite for realization and bona fide actualization. So it was that the youth took it upon himself to walk or ride his bike outside every day, even if only for 10 minutes. Soon after, he amended this too, except when there is rain falling above me. Sometimes, though, he walked even when it rained. What he found over the next several months is that there was much more to him than he had thought for most of his life. For example, the more he studied, the more he discovered beliefs and agreements which were the causal forces of his psyche, and, through the psyche, his body as well. So with the spaciousness of his increasingly peaceful mind and heart, Gerald began to form powerful agreements. Every one of his beliefs was put through the crucible, weighed for its merit based on his direct experiences, and tailored on an ongoing basis to be aligned with the ever-growing feeling that he was, in fact, a divine creator in interrelationship with all of creation. The clarity and coherence which he developed became sufficient to the point where he could, when he focused, tune into the field of any living being, even the most confused, deluded person around. Other teenage boys who he had previously had friction with became amiable acquaintances, as Gerald began to feel their pain and evidence his genuine care for them with simple, concise communication. A certain intrigue began to develop around him, for he chose to spend less and less time with his friends, and instead often wrapped himself in solitude. It wasn't that he no longer liked his friends, it was that he was finding more and more vitality through the calm, potent grace of the forest and the river. When he coasted through high school with C grades, Gerald felt some pride for having avoided the strain of meeting the expectations put forth by people who didn't have the capacity nor the inclination to care for him in the way that he cared for himself. It was clear by the distance his parents kept that they were eager to boot him from the nest, so that they may get on with their own pursuits. He felt no bitterness about this, and as his concerns about systemic planet-wide issues went largely unheard, or at best dismissed, by his mother and father, they voiced their acknowledgement, but like so many in those times, had simply retired the notion of the world healing within their lifespans. Gerald knew that he could not raise their support with lofty, idealistic proposals of universal peace and love. No, to win the hearts of people like them, he would need to build something real, and prove that it could work. Let the people see the truth, and they will, eventually, believe. More than belief, however, or the addictive hopium of Messiah worship, if the people witnessed even one true community, operating in sustained harmony with the laws of nature, they would, sooner or later, come around to the fact that peace is essential to our very survival. By the time his 20th year came around, Gerald was as solvent as he could be. His honor was intact, and he had logged 3 years nearly 3 years, of consistent work ethic, performing manual labor for various parties, with the occasional project more aligned to his vision. From cleaning and moving to landscaping and farm work, the young man's body had thusly become strong, and his will had grown formidable. Diligence in his focused efforts paid dividends for him, as he formed relationships with people from all walks of life. People who he idolized and people he wouldn't trust with a spoon made their way into his path, all, in some ways, providing insight and also receiving the wisdom he had become, which he now radiated constantly. For through his solitude, and his devotion to the principles and intentions he had articulated over the years, Gerald had focused his vital power into a laser-fine point. And so it was that when he reached the age of 21, young Gerald was outside the grasp of addiction, laziness, pride, lust, and any other limiting paradigm. He knew how he served. Indeed, he was free.